Today I think we're going to talk about something that you've probably heard before, and that's the 13 colonies. So let's go ahead and take a look. I wanted to start just with a quick little refresher, and really I want to know, can you put these in order? The early British colonies that we talked about back in September. What order did they come in? Jamestown, Plymouth, and Roanoke. Think about it for a second. And hopefully, guys, what you came up with was that Roanoke was first, okay, then Jamestown, and then followed by the Plymouth colony, right? So we should say Cap. All right, so Roanoke, remember, was the lost colony. Jamestown, the one where things started off really bad, tobacco saved it, and Plymouth colony with the that we talked about in the last set of notes, the Puritans that established territories up in New England. And speaking of New England, the first group that we're going to talk about, the first group of 13 colonies, is New England, which is this area located about here. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as the northern colonies. Typically, since the area is still called New England, I think it's better to refer to it as that. But we're talking about this area up here. Now, in New England, a lot of people lived in small villages with, churches in the center. Remember, these were deeply religious people. Faith was at the center of their lives. So not only would they use it for church service, but for town meetings and things like that as well. This area is known for their poor soil. It made it really difficult to farm, so most people practiced something called subsistence farming, which was, farming enough just to provide your family with subsistence, enough to keep them alive to eat. But as far as farming on a big scale, it wasn't really possible in New England because of the poor soil. So instead, they were good at having small businesses, and business really thrived in the New England colonies. The area was also rich in lumber, so the British would use these colonies really to build ships with the real strong old trees. Over in Europe, a lot of the forests had really been logged already. There wasn't a lot left, and the colonies really needed to build a strong navy, and they used lumber from this area to do just that. They were also known as the traders up here, right? They traded all kinds of good, lots of ports. Men worked as blacksmith, furniture makers. Women often would make garments and candles and sell on the trade and in their small businesses. A couple things I wanted to do here, guys. Instead of videos, I like to show paintings this time. This painting here is really about the first Thanksgiving that we talked about in the Plymouth colony. Up here really talks about some, Puritan New England life. You could tell from here that they lived in extended families, multi-generational families. Family was very important to them. Okay, this particular family, I think, they look a little wealthy. They must be successful in their small businesses. Okay, the next section we're going to talk about is the middle colonies. The middle colonies are located here. They are made up of, sorry, that's a bad drawing. They're made up of New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. Okay, and what the middle colonies did was they spent a lot of their time farming. They did have better soil conditions in the middle colonies. They were able to produce food, and they're actually known as the breadbasket of the 13 colonies. They produced not just breads, but other grains, corn, wheat, things like that. There's large port cities, both of New York and Philadelphia, are in the middle colonies, and thus became fairly populated. They had mining, small-scale manufacturing, and some home-based crafts were also industries in that region. The people in the middle colonies were much more diverse. Where in New England, they were mostly from England, right? Same religion. In the middle colonies, you see settlers from Holland, from Germany, from Sweden. And therefore, they had lots of different religions as well. Quakers established Pennsylvania, which we'll look at a picture of them in a minute. You see some Catholics, Anglicans, right? Different mix of religions all settling in the middle colonies. So here we have a painting of some of the, aspects of port life. So you have, some Deckhands here helping carry some of the big loads that we loaded onto these ships and then take it off to Europe or other parts of the globe. This would be a scene out of New York or Philadelphia probably back then. Here we have a Quaker service, probably in Philadelphia. You can see there's no altar like in most Christian churches. You'll see women sat on one side, men on the other. They didn't worship together necessarily. And there wasn't really a service. If you went to a Quaker service, really what you would see is people sitting in silence, praying in silence, and then as somebody felt the need to get up and speak, they would do so. So just a different way of practicing religion, like I said, much more diverse in the Middle Colonies. All right, the next section we're going to talk about are the Southern Colonies. Right, the Southern Colonies include Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia. Okay, so it's this area down here. Now, the Middle Colony, or the Southern Colonies, pardon me, really had kind of different products that they produced. In the Northern Middle Colonies, so here in Maryland and Virginia, they were good at growing tobacco. South Carolina and Georgia down here, they mainly grew rice initially. So commerce, right, small business and stuff didn't thrive in the Southern Colonies. They were much more worried about agriculture and farming. Tobacco and rice were grown on these really large farms that were called plantations. Plantation owners, not only were they wealthy, but they really controlled economic and political life in the southern regions. If you were a plantation owner, you were doing well. There was lots of Southerners who didn't own plantations, but the people that really made it big were really these plantation owners. Obviously, guys, plantation owners owned slaves, and lots of times these slaves really did suffer cruel punishment at the hands of the plantation owners, or the overseers, which we'll talk later about this year. Something to note, guys, is that the slaves that were being imported to the Southern Colonies really did develop their own culture based on their West African homelands. In New England and the Middle Colonies, they did have slaves at first. However, the process and opinions of slavery really kind of start to falter. So they don't see large-scale development of slave owners, and really they die out, especially by the mid-1700s. Here's a picture of a plantation. Okay, you'll see the large house usually in the center. There's a long driveway. It'd be surrounded by fields growing either rice at this time period or tobacco. If you guys are thinking cotton, that actually comes later. So this initial period of the 13 colonies, the Southerners weren't quite growing cotton just yet. Down here, like I said, we have slave culture. Lots of it, a lot of it is derived from their West African homelands. If you notice here, they're performing more of an African dance, but they're dressed more in European-style clothing. So you see a blending of the two cultures. Okay, the next area we're going to talk about is the backcountry. The backcountry isn't really an organized government area of the 13 colonies. So we're not talking about, New England at the top, the Middle Colonies, or the Southern Colonies. We're talking about the area that is just to the west, up in the mountains. This is unorganized territory in the western parts of the land, right? Today, obviously, it's a settled region, but back then, there wasn't a lot of people out there. So really, it was kind of a rugged type of person that would need to be able to survive out there. They had no military protection. The British military would not protect you out in the backcountry. There was also no organized government. Law enforcement was very limited, so if you wanted to really take matters into your own hands, you kind of could out there. There was a mixed black-white native population, so whereas the Middle Colonies were diverse, the backcountry really was super diverse. They also practiced small-scale farming, almost like New England, although the soil was better out there, but they would really grow just enough for them, not to sell on the market or anything like that. I think the backcountry, guys, is very interesting. Also, guys, because the people lived up in the hills, they were kind of foreign to a lot of the people living in the colonies. This is actually where you see the term hillbilly for the first time. Just an interesting little fact about that. But just keep in mind, right, backcountry, not necessarily established, but really kind of a rugged terrain with not a lot of laws. I guess the first Wild West, maybe. So here we're kind of what a backcountry would look like, right? It would just be kind of a little log cabin, probably maybe some fenced-in animals, some livestock, right? Small fields just to grow what's enough for your family. And here, really, if you wanted protection, mainly from the Indians, Native Americans, you have to really fend for yourself and protect yourself. So these are just two quick little drawings of that. Okay, so just a little quick comprehension check. Which is not true of the southern colonies? Was it that there were many Dutch and German settlers? They had large-scale farms called plantations. They grew tobacco and rice, or they used slave labor. Okay, and the answer here is definitely A, right? Where the Dutch and German settlers would have settled would be much more the middle colonies, not the southern colonies. All right, so next let's look at the different types of governments established in these colonies. This doesn't have anything to do with New England, middle, or southern, but how each individual colony was governed, and they were within one of three different ways. The first one is a charter colony. A charter colony means it was established by a group of settlers who received rights and privileges from the king, meaning the king said, here you go, group of people, you can go start this colony and run it on your own. Colonists elected governors and members of the legislature. Now, Britain could approve the governor, but generally the people had the most control in a charter colony. So if you look at this little chart here, right, the king would tell the people, go ahead and start your colony, and the people would choose a legislator and a governor. The two big examples of the 13 colonies that were run that way would be Connecticut and Rhode Island. Okay, the next one is a proprietary colony. The proprietary colony, there's another little step in between, right? Here we have that Britain granted land to a businessman, right, or an individual to start the colony. That leader basically ruled how he wished. I like to think of it as maybe like a mini king. So what happened was the businessman that was granted permission from the king would appoint a governor and half the legislature. And then the people would actually elect the other half of the legislature. So no matter what, the proprietor, the guy in charge, would have the end say in how the colony was run, but the people still had a pretty strong voice. They could elect half the legislature. So once again, looking at this chart, the king tells the businessman, go start the colony. The businessman then chooses a legislature for the colony and a governor. Oftentimes, guys, the governor would be the proprietor, but that's a different story. So then the people would elect the other half of the legislature. Okay, so together, this would be the two parts of a proprietary colony. Next, you have the royal colony. The royal colony was ruled directly by the king of Britain. So the king appointed a governor and a council. Okay? Together, the governor and the council had all the power. They could run the colony basically how they wished, right? Which usually was exactly what the king wanted. The people could elect a legislature, but the legislature didn't really have a lot of power. They were weak. And oftentimes, the legislature would fight the council for control, right? Who has more of the right to govern the people? And this really was a system that caused lots of controversy and isn't really resolved until the American Revolution. Eventually, guys, all the 13 colonies, as we move closer towards the Revolutionary War, you'll see that the government of Great Britain really changes all the forms of government in the 13 colonies to a royal colony where they could have more control when they see the American colonists starting to cause problems and ruffle feathers. Most of the colonies were royal colonies, even from the start. So we have Georgia, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, North and South Carolina, Virginia, and I even left out my home state of New York there. But so most of the colonies actually started off as royal colonies, and the ones that weren't become so. All right, a couple of things you need to know about the voting rights in the colonies. Usually voting rights were granted only to white men who owned property. Okay, so indentured servants, women, African Americans, and non-land-owning men couldn't vote. So you're talking about a very small group of people that could vote in elections back then, regardless of what type of government they had. All right, and just quickly enough, let's sort these. Okay, in New England, right, we have New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Okay, the middle colonies consist of New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. And then in the southern colonies, we have Virginia, North and South Carolina, Maryland, and Georgia. Okay, and just a couple comprehension questions before you guys are done here. What type of colonial government was established by a businessman who ruled as he wished? Now remember, anytime you see businessman, you should know that it is proprietary. And one last comprehension check question. What type of colonial government was established by a group of settlers who received rights and privileges from the king? The answer there is going to be a charter colony. Now, charter colonies, guys, generally would have most of the power granted to the people, proprietaries in between, and a royal, the people had the least amount of say. So start thinking about, which colony would you like to live in? And which region, New England, Middle, or Southern colony would you like to live in? Those are questions that we'll start asking in class. So you guys are all done for the set of notes. Don't forget to do a reflection question. And if you haven't already, make sure you go back through, start filling in your margins with main idea, keywords, guiding questions, or small pictures. Have a good day, guys.